Well, economic experts across Africa say this could be an exciting year for the continent's economies, which may start to move out of their traditional roles and into new sectors. In Johannesburg, Africa's economic capital, for now, VOA's Anita Powell reports on what may be in store for 2015 and beyond.
For as long as most economists can remember, African nations have provided the world with raw materials. Goods like oil, minerals, and agricultural products. But as 2015 dawns with oil prices plummeting, that may be changing. Those low prices may force some nations to diversify their offerings and cause investors to look to other opportunities. Experts gathered in Johannesburg, still the continent's economic hub, to discuss this new trend. Analyst Martin Davis says change is afoot.
Africa predominantly has been this commodity-driven economy where growth is aligned to commodity prices. We now see the headwinds of rapidly declining oil prices. What future does that hold out for continental growth, and what implications does that have for business? And I think arguably is Africa then sort of rebalancing away from traditional commodity-driven growth to one that is more balanced, more consumer-driven, and new wealth, new value being created beyond the simplistic business model of non-beneficiated raw materials.
That move away from commodities, says analyst Gareth Newham, could lead to less inequality, less corruption, and an overall better business environment.
And so there's a very close connection between good governance and the possibilities and opportunities for business going forward, and the opposite when there is not stability.
Davis predicts a geographic move as well.
So I think we're going to start to see the interest of business, the interest of capital move away from what's traditionally been oil-propelled economies in West Africa, think Nigeria, think Angola, amongst others, to more sort of East Africa, which is more resource poor, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania. Yes, Tanzania is going to be a natural gas story going forward as well, and also Mozambique.
Gas prices are expected to stay low for much of the year. For many consumers around the world, it's an opportunity to save money. But for African economies, it might be a chance to grow in new directions. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Well, for more insight on Africa's economic outlook, I'm joined by Francisco Ferreira, the World Bank's chief economist for Africa region. Mr. Ferreira, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vincent.
Now, first, do you share the thought that perhaps 2015 could actually be a very significant year for African economies?
I do, and I think exciting, the word that was used in the program, is a good word. Another word is challenging. So there's a glass half full, glass half empty story. You know, the good news, looking back a little bit, is in 2014, Africa grew more, grew faster than it did in 2013. Grew by 4.5% last year. Now for 2015, at the World Bank, we've actually just recently lowered our forecasts from about 5% growth in Africa as a whole to 4.6%. And that reflects in part some of the challenges associated with what the person in the piece that we just saw referred to as headwinds. We used to have these tailwinds from commodity prices. Now it's not just oil. It's a broader set of commodity prices that have been falling. And those are now creating a little bit of headwind. So there are challenges.
Now, how does the continent then overcome these challenges so that it can achieve higher economic growth, actually sustain whatever is currently going well, but also achieve even higher development objectives?
Well, the opportunity is, as was highlighted in the piece, economic diversification, right? And structural transformation, moving beyond natural resources and commodities and towards other sectors. The good news is that that has already started in Africa. The mixed news is that the structural transformation pattern that we had always expected to see, which was one of strong growth in manufacturing, has not really been observed in most countries. There are exceptions, like Ethiopia to some extent has a growing manufacturing sector, Nigeria, Tanzania. But apart from those countries, manufacturing has not been so dynamic. It's the services sector that's been growing very, very strongly.
The manufacturing, some tell me that is very challenged by, of course, the big boy, China, that manages to manufacture at a very lower rate and undermines smaller economies like African economies. How do you surmount that?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic with China. I mean, you're absolutely right that China, by being able to manufacture and transport very cheaply. So let's not underestimate also the logistics capability and the transport capability that China has derived. Of course, is a very competitive economy. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, places where we do see some interesting manufacturing growth and investment in Africa, it's often by Chinese and not large Chinese state-owned firms.
Small-scale Chinese coming onto the continent.
Ethiopia is a good example of that. So there's two sides to that.
It's also indigenous, which is another discussion that we need for another time. But very quickly, the issue of infrastructural development. How well is the continent doing as we get on to 2015?
It's doing better, but it needs to do much better still. And that, in fact, is part of the reason why I would describe 2015 not just as exciting, but also challenging, is that structural transformation, moving away from something you were doing, like natural resources, slowly towards other things, takes a bit of time. It takes time to build roads. It takes time to get more power and to connect people to power, to make electrical power reliable and accessible so that the manufacturing firms can come. You know, industries won't come if there are blackouts or if electricity is very expensive.
In the few seconds left, how does the World Bank help African continents figure out the best way to really spur even greater economic growth?
You know, we try to help through a combination of knowledge, dialogue, and money. We have a very robust lending program of upwards of $10 billion a year, and we're involved across the sectors of the economy, from health prevention and Ebola all the way to building power plants and electricity and so on.
Do you mind that there are other people operating in the same field like China?
No, we see them as partners. You know, interestingly, last week, my boss, the Vice President for Africa, was in China talking about possible partnerships.
Interesting, World Bank partnering with China. Well, for the sake of the good. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferreira. Francisco Ferreira is the World Bank's chief economist for Africa region.
Thank you.